Okay. Um,
Okay, how can I help you gentlemen today?
yeah, first, let's just introduce our podcast. We're the Life in Motion podcast. Here with the host Noah and then Haroon, and we're here with Glenna Crooks, and this is our first podcast we're recording. Yeah, first of all, just want to thank you for being here and being one of our guests today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Is this your first podcast, or have you done this before?
I've done a number of podcasts.
Okay, gotcha. So you got some experience under your belt. So we did a little bit of research, just to find a little bit more about you. But why don't you like first introduce maybe your career path and like what you do now?
Okay. I'm in my eighth career. During all of
Um,
this time, I've been in education and in healthcare, in the public sector, in the private sector, and I've been an entrepreneur. So in my first career, I was a school psychologist. If you know anybody who's ever been on an IEP, an individual education plan, I'm the inventor of the IEP. Those were the years when children who had special needs did not have a right to an education. I was in Indiana at the time. We were watching case law emerge in Pennsylvania. And what I was doing was finding kids who were not in school or kids who were really having learning problems, figuring out how they learned, and then helping the teachers and the parents to understand how they learned and therefore how to teach them. I developed that methodology. And then when the case law established the right of all children to an education, the Indiana Department of Education knew something about what I was doing, asked me to show them, and it became part of legislation. I burned out doing that. So I went back to graduate school and got a PhD. It's an interdisciplinary degree. And from that point in time, moved into healthcare. Healthcare is the first system that impacts the life of a child. So I wanted to get to them early, and that was healthcare. On the healthcare side, I was in government as the senior health policy advisor in the Reagan administration. So over all of the agencies that you might hear about, NIH and FDA and CDC and so on. After that, eventually I went to Merck, which was a drug and vaccine company, to start their public policy operations. While I was there, then Merck made a decision about changing the way it did the vaccine business and creating a separate division. So I helped to set that up and became the global vice president of the vaccine business. After that, I consulted, which is what I'm still doing. I'm an author and a speaker. And my most recent work right now is in helping people to understand their support networks. We have a lot more support than we realize. It's just hiding in plain sight. Nobody's taught us to look for it. And that's what I'm doing now.
that's very interesting how you've had so many like different career paths. So when you were like job hopping, I guess, how did you acclimate to the new environments? You said you worked as a psychologist, worked in public health, and then also worked at Merck, which is like a big pharmaceutical company. Um, this is like more towards like how Gen Z should acclimate to the workforce because obviously we've had trouble. So how did you acclimate to the workforce, especially job hopping?
Yeah, and here's what I would say. I've had 8 careers. Gen Z is probably going to have 10 or more. I'm a social scientist by training. So I was trained in anthropology and sociology and psychology and ethnographic research and so on. And so I considered myself like an anthropologist going into a new culture and having to learn how that culture worked. How do people engage with one another? What were the rules of the road? What was effective and not effective in terms of engaging with other people? I think, though, that there's another thing, and it didn't come to me early in my career. It was only in looking back retrospectively that I can see that there's a thread about the skills that I have that are not common. I have a very weird mind and I see how to solve problems. So if you looked at the one thread that ran through my entire career, It was that I knew how to organize chaos and solve complicated problems. I could break things down and explain it to other people so that they would understand it and they could take their next steps. What that means is I'm frequently there at the start of something, but I'm not there to finish it. So I come in and I organize it all, show them how to do it, and then I go on to the next problem. And that I think would speak to knowing what's your core skill, or maybe plural skills. Another, I think, core skill that I had is that I'm known to be a pretty good speaker. So I don't see myself as a professional speaker. I see myself as a government official who speaks, or a corporate executive who speaks, or an author who speaks. But ever since eighth grade, people have been saying that I'm a great speaker. I often, after my speeches, people come up and want to know when I'm running for office.
Yeah.
So that was another core skill, and it's one that I really suggest that people develop, and particularly if they are in a diverse group. The stages have been populated by white men for a long time, and audiences now want diversity. Regardless of what you're hearing from government right now, audiences want diversity. And so if you are someone in a group that is a diverse group, if you can master that skill and feel comfortable on stage, aside from the usual, butterflies we all get when we get in front of other people, I think that's another thing that really helps in your career, and something to start really early. There's one more thing too, and that is, and I recommend to the college students that I work with that they join the student version of the professional society that they intend to be in when they launch their career. So if someone was planning a career in medicine, they should join student AMA. If they were planning a career in law, they should join the student ABA. If they were planning a career in the public health, they have a student version as well. Those dues are low and sometimes free for students. And what that does is put you in the network of the people that you will be working with in the future. So if you go to their meetings, if you get involved in one of their committees, they will get to know you and they will help pull you along in your career to the next milestone that you are interested in.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. I think that communication skills and being able to speak publicly to like big audience as well as smaller audience to get your message across is really important. Something that I was kind of scared of. I didn't really have good public speaking skills, and I'm still developing it as well. I'm not sure. What about you, Haroon? Um, how are your public speaking skills?
What I found is they improve a lot with practice, and it's just more about putting myself in situations where I can test myself in that sense. A lot of times it's very easy to avoid those, but when push comes to shove, I feel like honing in those skills is not as difficult as they might be made out to be in our minds. And
One of the things you can do is to watch other speakers. Watch the ones who are not good for what's not good, and then watch the ones who are good. I feel like I learned something about how to speak from absolutely everyone I've ever seen on stage, because they're either a good example or they're a bad example. And so you can learn either way.
right. Um,
That's so. I'll go right ahead.
I appreciate it. I might go a little off topic here, but do you have something that's a little more on topic? Because I was gonna go into something else with this.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you one question. I'm from what I heard, you were a good problem solver when it comes to breaking down like ambiguous problems. Do you think that's a skill that you're born with naturally, or is it a skill that you can work on, or is it
Hmm.
something you worked on?
I That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that you can learn strategy.
Mhm.
which is what you're really, I think, talking about. I taught a graduate course in strategy in public health. One of the things that I required is that the students take the strategy model that I was teaching and apply it to a piece of fiction. So I gave them a list with items. Some came from the Army War College that they could pick from, or they could pick their own. They could either do a movie or they could do a book. Everybody did a movie.
Yeah.
The nice thing about studying, and in fact, other faculty said, "What are you doing? Why would you have them do that?" And I said, "That's because I want them to see strategy in everything that they see. I want you to be able to sit in a movie and say, oh my gosh, that's what they're doing. They're defining the problem. Oh my gosh, that's what they're doing. They're playing with an idea." And the reason that the Army War College uses fiction is it's very safe to play out scenarios because nobody's going to get hurt. And so it allows you to go down many paths and explore what the opportunities and the alternatives and the roadblocks might be so that you can figure your way around them. So I think from that perspective, it's teachable. I think, though, that one of the things that's helped me a lot in that is that I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
Most people would not think that, but I really am. So I do a lot of talking. I mean, I do a lot of listening of other people talking. I do a lot of watching just to kind of see what's happening. And especially, it's almost like I can get in a mental zone, almost a meditative zone, where I can see the pieces coming together. I saw it portrayed really well in the movie The Queen's Gambit. That was a series, I believe, on Netflix. And the way that young girl learned chess and the way that she could see things moving on her ceiling at night is kind of the way I see things moving too. And then I watch for patterns. So, and that's probably the key element to being successful in strategy, is that I watched the patterns and I kept track. And so I looked at when somebody tried to get something done, and they weren't like the boss who could order people around, what were the elements that were in place? And then when they tried and they failed, were those elements missing? And so over time, I was able to codify a process I call centricity principle. And I virtually guarantee that if you get at least 90% of the things right that I've laid out, you will succeed in creating the change that you want using this strategy.
That's really interesting in terms of like insight on how to think of different problems, because right now I'm pursuing healthcare consulting, so I know that's something that I could apply to my professional career as well. So, yeah, Arun, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask?
I actually do. I was quite surprised to find out you're an introvert, considering you wrote a book like The Network Stage, and in it, I feel like you focused a lot on like building networks and utilizing those. And one thing I noticed in myself, and I feel like I can speak for a lot of people in my age range, a lot of us feel like working and building things up in like a professional sense is like done alone. And I think that I find it interesting that you're able to understand the power of leveraging networks and things like that to succeed. And I wanted to actually know, as somebody who hasn't really done that much and hasn't leveraged it like I could potentially do so, what would some tips be? What would you say some tips are for leveraging networks and getting better at doing so?
I love the question. I love all your questions. The first thing I would say is to realize that we've never been taught to do that. All right. We also don't have good media models to see it happening. You look at a show and they don't nearly portray all the people in somebody's life.
Right.
And we don't have tools that are good either. So, for example, I could open up my cell phone and give it to
Mhm.
you, and you could not find my mother, my brother, my best friend, my doctor, my lawyer, if you needed to, and I needed you to help me out, because they're stored alphabetically. Um, you couldn't look at a phone bill and know who was important in my life because I don't call my mom on the phone, on a cell phone, because she can't hear very well that way, but she's very important in my life.
Right.
So the way to get started is to start paying attention to people in your life. Now, that's how I did it. Now, you know, in the network sage, I identified 8 different networks that support working adults. And by the time you're in college, you probably have at least 7 of them. Well, you actually have all 8. The Unless you're not working at all, but I'm assuming you gentlemen may have a part-time job or something,
Okay.
in which case you've got 8. Now, once you understand that structure that I lay out in the book, you can start paying attention to the people in it. That's the first step. If you don't have that structure, first of all, it will take you a long time to figure out who's in your life. And in addition to that, you will miss people who are important that you wouldn't otherwise think about. I was talking to a college student last week, for example, and she does not have a will. She does not have powers of attorney or have signed a healthcare power of attorney. Something, you know, because if something happens to her, given that she's over 18 right now, her parents are not going to be able to get information about her medical condition, and they'll be flying blind. So, you know, she didn't think about that until we talked about the structure of those networks and who ought to be in them. Now, once you've done that, then you can sort of step back and say, well, what is it I want to accomplish? And therefore, do I have the right people in my network? Do I need to reach out and find new people? Or am I overloaded in some areas and I need to cut back? One of the
Right.
things I see in college students is that they have a lot of social connections, a lot. And that's what college is partly all about, is expanding your social horizon. I'll tell you about one young woman. This typically happens by around junior year. Um, she decided, well, first of all, she was debating, did she want to get an MD and become a psychiatrist, or did she want to become a PhD and become a research psychologist? What she did was talk to her dad and get her dad to make a list of everybody that he knew who was either a physician or a psychologist. And then she arranged informational interviews with all of them to find out what their life was like and their lifestyle and were they happy with their career choice and that sort of thing. And that helped her make the decision that she wanted to become a PhD psychologist. Now, the next thing then is she decided that her goal was to get into graduate school with a full ride. Now, that's a different task than getting into college. Yeah. So to do that then, in looking at her map, she decided to dramatically reduce her social connections. Now, at her particular university, there was a new sorority that was going to be setting up. She joined that sorority, knowing then that she would have a social network of other women in the sorority for the rest of her life. And she cut back on her other social obligations. And she was still keeping in touch with a lot of kids she knew from high school that, you know, the relationship was like dwindling away. So, and that's natural. Then what she did is she formed a very strong relationship with the faculty in her department, spent more time with them, and her goal was to have a publishable paper by the time that she was a senior. So she apprenticed herself and she interned, she networked her way to interns doing this, and she was successful. So she did have the publishable, she was able to get the publishable paper, and she eventually did get into a graduate program in psychology. She earned her PhD, and she is now working at a major New York hospital as a research psychologist, working with people with severe mental health problems. And her graduate degree was all on full ride. So she was strategic in doing that. So for example, you guys looking at what your summer internship might be, you know, particularly if you are doing something that is different than what your family did. So you could come from a family of lawyers, But if you want to go into medicine, you're going to have to find mentors in medicine who can help you understand that and get the right sort of internships and so on. Your family may not be able to help you do that. You might also be a first generation college student, in which case they can't help you understand what that life is going to be like. So once you have a sense of what it is you want to accomplish, then you can reach out to people in the field. Chances are, you know some other student socially whose mom or dad works in that area, and by reaching out to them and asking if they will arrange it for you to meet with their mom or dad, you'll get the information that you need and start to build the connections that you need.
Mhm. I would like to add that I think having a network is important, but leveraging the right networks to get to where you want is even more important. Like what you said, in terms of like, say your parents are lawyers and you want to go into medicine, you're gonna have to find someone who's working in that field in order to give you better insight rather than if I'd say maybe like your parents heard something from someone working in medicine. They could totally have a different bias towards
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm not sure about Haroon, did you have like a similar experience or had to leverage your network more effectively?
Um, what I find quite interesting is I think without realizing it, like the networks are big aspects of medicine, like my pre-med, because I'm pre-med right now, and my journey has been kind of like that. I'm a first generation student in America, so I didn't know who to go for help. And it turned out that my friend's older sister, who had already gone down the path and was already in med school, um, I leveraged her a lot in teaching me everything from like the process of like the med school application cycle to the big MCAT to how I should schedule my classes. And it she was a big reason and one of the main reasons I actually was able to get through a lot of the milestones. So yeah, it's really
You
cool to
had
see.
some amazing instincts to do that. I mean, hats off to you. And
Thank you.
there's another thing too that I would want you to know about the networks. So every network has a center of gravity. If you are below that center of gravity, it will pull you up. Now, I learned this playing tennis, although I didn't realize it at the time. When I played with a better player, my game was better. When I hang out with smart people, I get smarter, right? The converse is also true. If you are above that center of gravity, the network will pull you down. And what happens, especially if you are growing and changing and you are advancing at school or in your career or whatever, um, and the network, people in your network start to get afraid that you're going to leave them behind, and they will test you. They will try to pull you back. They will try to sabotage you unconsciously, or you will end up unconsciously sabotaging yourself. So I'd like you to know about that. It's not because they are bad people. It's because we as humans survive in groups. And if it looks like you are moving on, unconsciously there's thinking, oh my God, he's moving on. Am I going to be okay? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to be okay? That's why. So if you feel that happening with an old group of friends, or with a family network, you can raise it and say, you think I don't love you anymore? Of course I love you. And see if that helps to get them to sort of back off maybe some of the criticism that they will send your way.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question regarding that actually. So, I'm assuming like the center of like gravity that you're talking about, like it's different per network. Like for me, in some of my like groups, I feel like I would be above the center of gravity, but most of them I am lower, right? So how would you like balance that between the two? Because for example, I help a lot of my friends with the pre-med stuff, so I would say I'm above the center of gravity in that sense. But then there's a way more people that are like advanced and I learn from as well. So um, is it fine to be on the higher end of the center of gravity in some networks as long as you have the other networks where they're bringing you up as well?
Great question again. In my book, I talk about three steps. First, become aware. who's in your network, then decide what it is you want and need, and then make the transformation accordingly. Now, is it okay to be a higher center of gravity? Absolutely. If you have a particular reason for doing that. I have a friend who is a good skier, and he teaches adaptive skiing to people who have lost limbs or have other sorts of disabilities. And that for him is almost a religious practice, a spiritual practice of reaching back and helping somebody. And that is a very worthwhile thing to do if you know that's what you're doing and you're conscious and aware of it. You're in a certain way, you're paying back the people who've helped you. And by the way, it's probably a good communication exercise, because if you're going to become a physician, you're going to be doing a lot of teaching to a lot of people as you're helping them to understand what it is that's ever going on with them. So you could see it in that way. You could see it as becoming a mentor to someone and beginning to build loyalty with other people who may become your colleagues one day. It would be unfortunate if you did that in every single network. You've got to keep your eye on the bigger picture of what you need to do to accomplish your ultimate objectives.
Yes. Okay, awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add, Glenna, for our audience right now, what type of questions would you ask yourself in order to get clarification of, when you should stray away from groups that are kind of lower than you and, I guess not really cut them off, but obviously stray away from them and move on? Like, what type of questions should you ask yourself to see if the group is really worth staying with, or your network is staying with?
The biggest thing you need to focus on is clarity. Get clear, and why are you staying, or why would you leave? If you're around a group who brings you down, if you finish a conversation and you don't feel great about it because something's going on that doesn't work for you, think about what that is. That's the first question. And see how much clarity you can get. Sometimes you might talk to another friend or counselor or someone who can help you sort that out. The next question to ask yourself is, how are you going to leave? It's okay to leave. It's okay to change a connection. I just suggest that you do it carefully, and I'll explain why. One of the networks of the 8 is a network that I call ghosts. Ghosts are people who used to be in your life who aren't any longer. Like maybe they passed away, or maybe they moved away, or maybe your paths just diverged somehow. Like I've tried to find my college roommate, I can't.
Yeah.
Social media and all that, I still can't find her. Now, there are several kinds of ghosts. And this is important to know. One type I call friendly. These were the people who loved you and you knew it. They cared about you. If you think about them, it warms your heart, you'd smile, right? For me, one of my friendly ghosts is my paternal grandfather. He died when I was about 4.5 years old. Except for family photographs, I don't remember what he looks like. But I will tell you something, I will never forget how wonderful it was to sit in his lap. He loved me, and I knew it, and it felt so good. Now, there's another type I call hungry ghost. These are the people who left you with a bruise and a hole in your heart. I call them hungry because you could not satisfy them then, and you cannot satisfy them now, but you are still trying. Not with them, but with somebody who reminds you of them, or a situation that reminds you of them. So if you had a 4th grade teacher who said you'd never amount to anything because you forgot your homework, or a high school coach who said you weren't man enough for the sport, or a lover who walked out and said that you were selfish and it was all your fault, that's still hanging with you. Now, the thing about leaving is, if you're going to leave, you don't want to be a hungry ghost for somebody. And you don't want them to be a hungry ghost for you. I will tell you about one young woman. I actually, it's a story about 2 young women. I respect them both. When this woman looked at her networks, she saw someone that was was all take and no give. So she arranged a coffee date with her, and the two women sat down. And this woman said, our relationship is really unbalanced. I feel I give it all, and you just take it, and you never give anything back to me. And the other young woman said, "Oh my God, you're right. That's not the kind of friend I want to be. I want to be a better friend. How can I be a better friend to you?" I really admire that. That's a much younger generation than mine, and I'm not sure my generation would have done that. But her generation had whatever the EQ was to be able to do that, and so they resolved it.
Mhm. I would say it's pretty hard to like, I guess communicate with it, but it's like really key to communicate what you're actually feeling about the relationship so that the other person knows how you feel because obviously people can't read your mind.
Mhm.
Um, so like you were saying, her being able to communicate with that really settled, like really balanced out the relationship and made them on the same page.
I can't tell you another story. Another woman, this she was by now a mom. Her kids had special needs, and so she really had a lot of extra work to do with the school to be sure that they were getting the education they needed. She was very social, very, very extroverted and outgoing. She had a number of friends who would do these like home-based parties where you would buy something like Tupperware or whatever. And so she set some boundaries. And so she wrote him a note and sent him an email. And she said, "You know what? I love you and I want to support your business, but here's the deal. I got all this other stuff going on in my life. So I tell you what, I cannot come to all of your events. You pick one, I will put it on my calendar. I will be there for that one to support you. But until I get my life settled, I just really can't be as social as I used to be." So that was a situation where it wasn't all or nothing. It was just setting a boundary so she had a little more personal space. That's an option too.
Yeah. Haroon, did you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
Um, Regarding this topic, no, I mean, I think it's quite clear. It makes a lot of sense. If I think my main takeaway, at least from all this, is, communication, clarity. All these are really important things that I think being mindful of what you're doing and how you're approaching everything from networks to your own intentions is one of the key factors in succeeding in whatever aspect you're trying to succeed in.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing I just saw recently on in social media. I'm following a woman who is a pediatric emergency physician in Florida, Beach Gym 10. And she just had this is about self-awareness now that you just reflected on. She talked about how she chose emergency medicine. She said when she was doing the rounding in the other categories of that she could have done, she said, "We're all dressed up. I'm standing in heels. We're talking to patients at the bedside, and I just did not like getting dressed up." So she said, "I decided I wanted to be a physician who could wear scrubs every day." And she said, "I didn't want to stand around." And so she merged her own understanding of herself. She liked the fast paced. And so, she said, "Oh, and I don't have to take call. I might have to work nights sometimes. I might have to work weekends and holidays, but I don't have to take call and I don't have to get dressed up." And she's building an amazing following and has become an incredible educator and communicator on social media. I'm really impressed with her. But that's the notion of knowing yourself in ways that maybe people won't encourage you to think about.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to move forward a little bit regarding our audience because our audience is probably going to be younger because we are probably going to post the podcast on social media. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about Gen Z and the workforce. You've worked a lot of different careers. How do you establish your image and credibility when you first start working? Because obviously employers they don't know you like in a professional setting. Obviously, they can interview you and ask like different questions, but how do you establish your image within a firm, and how do you establish your credibility?
I've hired a lot of people. Oh, probably over 300 altogether. I've only fired one. I've also hired a lot of interns. So let me say going in that when I was first starting to hire interns, I wanted people that somewhere between their senior year and their graduate school year. I had an accidental experience in that the person I hired, I mean, after several summers of having people who had just recently graduated, who were headed of graduate school, I hired somebody like that who got sick and wasn't able to come on board. And excuse me, excuse me. Um, and she said, I can't do this, but I had this really cool younger sister, who was at the time the summer between her sophomore and junior year. Now I was sort of desperate for some help. So I took her on board anyway, and she turned out to run circles around the older people that I had hired. And then one of the responsibilities that I gave her at the end of that summer was to find my next intern for the following summer. She found somebody who was between her freshman and sophomore year, who was even better. So the first thing that I would say is, you guys come with skill sets that people in the workforce don't yet have. And I'm not sure that I can articulate that really well. Well, part of it is you're digital natives, and you really know how to leverage the technology in a way that the people in the workforce may not already be comfortable with. I mean, I just made a commitment to hire young interns from then on because they were superior to the people I'd had before. So the way to build your reputation is to be good at what you do and what you can do, and to fill in anything that anybody else can't do because they're not digital natives or whatever, and learn from them as you do. Now, the only person that I fired was someone whose attitude was, let's see, she was negative about the clients that we were working with. So I do a lot of consulting with biopharmaceutical companies, and she had a view that I did not detect when I was interviewing, that was opposed to profit-making enterprises. So and it was a view that was so locked in. I mean, she was a summa cum laude graduate of her graduate program. I mean, she was a very intelligent person, but she had a bias that did not fit with the work we were doing with the client. And so that just was not a cultural fit. She had to go. So that would be another thing for you to think about is this a place where they're doing work I think is valuable work? And so I want to be there to contribute to that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. A lot of culture or a lot of your environment, especially in the workplace, has an effect on your morals, your beliefs, and like you said,
Mhm.
that's why she had I guess, a dispute with like the work that she was doing, you know. So, yeah, it definitely makes sense. I was gonna add that shoot, I totally forgot what I was gonna say. This is my first podcast, but um, I was gonna ask for Gen Zs in general. Do you think that a lot of companies have been saying that a lot of Gen Zs aren't going above and beyond with their work. Do you think that's another way that Gen Zs can prepare better by, going above and beyond wherever they work and whatnot? Do you think that's a true statement or a reasonable statement in your eyes?
I'm going to tell you the truth. I am not one to label the generations and make generalizations about them. I look at the person, what they're capable of, what they tell me they want to do, and then whether they can follow through and do the work. One of the things that I have found is that when you're excited about what you're doing, when you're glad to be there, as when you're young, there will be people in the organization who will want to mentor you. So look for that, not necessarily formally, but look for people who are teaching you something and be the sponge to learn. And that will help create a relationship with the older person that you're working with that will buy you a little bit more degrees of freedom and tolerance for any mistakes you make or any other way that they think you might be falling short. Um, you know, as the generations work together, this is the most complicated workforce we've ever seen with this many generations working together. But the reality is that's your future. I mean, you guys are virtually guaranteed to live to be 100. You're going to have us, like I said, I had 8 careers, you're going to have 10. So your ability to learn and grow and adapt is really important in all of those settings. And then also, and part of that adaptation is being with other people. I would suggest this. Don't look at somebody and say, oh my God, they're this generation and therefore they are like this. I'm going to generalize because that bias will get in your way. That it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you don't want that.
I'd say that could go both ways, whether the older generation looks at the younger generation or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to add something really, well, something I realized with, I do a lot of like networking chats with people working in the firms I want to work at. They say that when you're asking questions, you kind of want to ask the questions that you think are dumb or the questions that you might not know, might not know the answer to in the beginning when you first start your job, because then you're able to like build a solid foundation of what type of questions you want answered, and then as time moves forward, you're able to build that knowledge and not be able to like ask questions that have already been answered either by your manager or someone higher above. So that's something I noticed a lot with the people I've talked to when it comes to asking different questions.
That sounds right to me. And, in my opinion, a good question is always, what am I missing? What questions should I be asking? That will elicit a lot of good responses from people. There's also there's a book, I think it's called The First 90 Days, that is for people who are making a transition in the workplace to a new workplace. And it's sort of how you can navigate that early start. And that's another way.
Awesome. Haroon, do you have any other questions you would like to know about regarding gender or advice you would want to receive?
Nothing's really coming to mind right now, if I'm being completely honest.
Right. So we're gonna wrap up this podcast soon. I just wanted to ask you a few other questions, Glenna. You've had a lot of experience. Do you have any like regrets that you had in the past that maybe you could give advice on to, us seniors about to graduate, enter a new stage in our lives?
Yeah. My biggest one is, because I'm an introvert, I would much rather stay at my desk and work than go out in the evening with people having drinks or something. And I wish I had built better networks when I was younger. I did have lunch with people, so that worked. But I wish that I had built broader networks earlier in my career. One of the things to know is that the best source of jobs and mates, if you're still looking for some, is not through your first degree connections, but through their connections, your second degree connections. The reason is you and your first degree connections tend to have the same information. You need to get outside that bubble to find the job or the mate. So that means asking your friend or your connection for somebody that they know that you don't know. And that got in my way as an introvert. I didn't do that early enough on. I wish I had.
I would say I connect with you on the same level. Although I may be like able to like converse a lot, I would say I'm introverted like you. So sometimes I kind of just want to stay at home and not really go out to anything. But you never know who you can meet, honestly. Like this one workshop I went to, like the CEO or founder of YouTube was literally there speaking at the event. So if I would have not gone, I probably wouldn't like have gotten super useful information about his like path and how he got there. So honestly, just take advantage of as many opportunities that are available to you. It's like,
Well, to the degree that it's healthy for you. I mean, they say about us introverts, we're not party poopers, but we are pooped by the party. So we need to have our alone time to recharge because there's so much going on inside. We need the time to think. Extroverts need to talk to think. So, understanding where you are on that, spectrum is an important part of understanding yourself and then how you want to build a career.
mhm. I guess you kind of want to understand your limitations of your social battery, um, and know like when to balance it out,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the like things that you're given. I had one last question. We are in our 20s, technically, in the early 20s. How crucial is that period of being in your 20s to set up the rest of your life?
Um, I would say the most crucial thing in your 20s is to establish the habits and the behaviors that make you healthy.
Mm,
And healthy in the very broad definition: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual health. Because, I remember being that age and I remember feeling like I just couldn't wait to get to the next thing. But the reality is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
mhm,
And so developing the habits, learning about yourself at that stage is really foundational and fundamental to what you will need for the rest of your life. So that's what's important.
mhm. I say the key thing
So
is
I
like, oh,
so I
go
have one
right.
last question as well. Uh, so as an introvert myself as well, at least I think I am. What is one habit that you think I could, or a couple habits that come to mind that I could maybe develop to maybe push out of the bubble that I might put myself in at times in terms of anything like networking or any habits that are good for my mental health or in like long-term success?
Well, what I would say is anything that helps you understand yourself better is that you can make a habit. If it's a little hard to, let me see. If you are an introvert who always wants to stay inside, then you need to get outside because you do need self help. You need support. You need to be with somebody from time to time. Humans need to connect. It's learn yourself well enough, keep track of your behaviors. Um, if you've got wearables and you're watching your biology, look at what stresses you out and therefore how you can address that stress over time. Um, the other thing too that's really helpful for an introvert is to have a wingman. Don't just be alone. Go with a friend because especially if they're extroverted,
Yeah.
because then they can carry the conversation and the party for a while, and you can step back a little bit and don't have to be the one who's upfront and engaged. That's another tactic for us introverts.
Yeah, I would say one of my roommates is really extroverted, so that's why he drags me out to these workshops, just to network with, anyone at the workshop. So that's very helpful. I like how you added that tip. It definitely makes it a lot easier. So, yeah, so I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Like we said, this is episode two actually of the Life in episode three actually. Yeah, episode three of the Life in Motion podcast. A little rusty here, but thank you for your patience, Glenna, with us, and thank you for most importantly being here and giving us your insight. We know that you have a lot of expertise in the healthcare field, just in general. So yeah, just want to first off thank you for everything from being here.
Well, I think that it's really a good thing that you're taking this initiative. And, you've asked a little bit about how you position yourself. This is going to position you. You're taking an initiative.
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah, and that will be impressive to whoever you interview with in a job or to get into medical school.
Yeah, I think Denise really wanted us to get out of our comfort zone. So reaching out to people a lot older or a lot more experienced than us was definitely something that got us out of our comfort zone. You know, I think this experience was really great, especially being on a podcast for the first time. It's a little hard keeping a conversation going for that long, but yeah. So yeah, guess we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Glenna. Like we said, this is a Life in Motion podcast. Look out for any episodes being released. We hope to release our next episode Friday at 5 p.m. Central Pacific Time. And thanks to the audience for listening to the Life in Motion podcast. Hope you guys
Thank you
enjoy.
guys.
Yeah.
All right.